Hello everybody, welcome back to another true crime video. As you can tell, I'm sure already, this video is going to be a little bit different in many ways, but the first being that we're gonna try some soft-spoken true crime today. I love a good whisper in ASMR, but I do also enjoy soft-spoken, specifically when it comes to storytelling. And so I wanted to give that a try today. If you are not a fan of soft-spoken, I completely understand. And there are other videos on my channel that I hope will be of benefit to you. But if you do like soft-spoken video, I invite you to stay with me for this because it is a really, really good story. One of the other reasons I'm excited about this story is because we're going back in time together. If I'm not mistaken, the majority of the cases I've covered so far are fairly modern, but this one is not. And we're gonna go back to talk about a girl that was born in the 1920s. And finally, the other part that I'm excited about is that this true crime case takes place in Europe, when I'm pretty sure, again, the majority of the cases I've talked about, if not all of them, have been in the United States. So this is going to be about a woman who was beautiful. She was just drop dead gorgeous. But what happens when a drop dead gorgeous woman becomes a cold-blooded murderer? What happens when somebody can't handle rejection and resorts to homicide? That's the question we're asking today. So this story is about a woman by the name of Pauline Dubuisson. As I mentioned, she was beautiful. She was also described as tempestuous, even conceited, and the kind of woman who chewed men up and spat them out when she was done with them. She even became a hate figure in her own country, listed by French resistance as a Nazi collaborator. The story of Pauline Dubuisson reads like a melodrama, and it would go on to inspire the main character in a French film. So, let's get into it. Pauline was born in 1927 in Dunkirk, which is a northern French city that was supposedly founded by her great-great-grandfather. Her father was an engineer, and the family lived a comfortable middle-class life. Pauline had 3 older brothers, but it was she who was the brightest star in her family's galaxy. She was pretty and vivacious, and she was also highly intelligent and wanted to become a doctor. So she really had it all going for her, at least on paper. But clearly, things did not work out as they should. Her academic career ends up hitting a major roadblock in 1941 when she was 14 years old. This bright little girl had by now developed an understanding of sex, physical attraction, dating, the things that come with puberty, right? And growing older, she started to become aware of these things. And around this time, even though she was only 14 years old, she developed a precocious interest in naval men. So this was during the time of the Nazi occupation, and Pauline did not much care for which side the men she was interested in fell on. She just was a little boy crazy, essentially, and that may even be putting it lightly. It didn't matter who they fought for. It really did not. She just was all about the men. Now, after being caught in a compromising situation with a German sailor, she was ejected from the local school she attended. And because of that, her father had to hire a private tutor to ensure that she could actually graduate. Because again, she had academic goals. She wanted to be a doctor. And her father, who was an engineer, didn't want anything to get in the way of this. However, that episode, that experience for her, didn't teach her any life lessons as I think her father had hoped. She continued sleeping with the enemy whenever the chance presented itself. In 1944, when she was 17, while working as a nurse at a Dunkirk hospital, she started an affair with a 53-year-old German colonel. And because of this choice, she becomes branded as a traitor by her own people. Now, when the war ended, she received treatment, as did any woman who made the choices that she did. She was dragged out into the town square where her clothing was ripped off and her hair shorn. Swastikas were drawn all over her naked body, as she was then kicked and punched, just completely beaten by an angry crowd of people. She was dragged before a people's court and tried as a traitor. Her reasoning for this, saying that she had only fraternized with the enemy at this point, or right around this time, was to drum up business for her father's company, but that excuse completely fell on deaf ears. And the sentence of the court ended up being death by a firing squad. Fortunately, though, for Pauline, her father was a decorated hero of the First World War and still held some sway. After he interceded on her behalf, Pauline was released. She was, however, ordered to leave Dunkirk and never to return. She and her father then fled to Lyon on the other side of the country. Shamed by the disgrace of his daughter's actions and all that it brought upon the family, her father ended up committing suicide. In 1947, Pauline reignited her dreams of studying for a medical degree by enrolling at a university. It was there that she met a good-natured but naive young man named Felix Bailey. Felix had never been with a woman before he met Pauline. And as we know, Pauline was a very experienced young woman. Remember, she's just stunning. And so he was immediately infatuated with her. So much so that he proposed marriage after their very first night together. And Pauline simply just laughed him off. But over the next 3 years, Felix would suffer greatly at Pauline's hands. Whereas he was devoted, Pauline was as promiscuous as ever. She slept her way through the student body and even the faculty at her university. Eventually, understandably so, heartbroken and emotionally drained Felix decided to end the relationship. Without saying a word to Pauline, he packed up his things and decamped for Paris, where he hoped he could finish his medical degree. And there he met a young woman named Monique Lombard. She was equally beautiful, and she was a sophisticated woman. Monique was, however, the antithesis of who Pauline was, which was a good change for Felix. She was deeply, deeply in love with Felix and gladly accepted his marriage proposal. Now, word of her former lover's engagement got back to Pauline. And let's just say it was not received well. She might not have wanted Felix to be her husband, but at the same time, she was damned if she was going to let him be with any other woman. She was not okay with that. Her pride got in the way, and she just could not emotionally handle that, even though she was promiscuous and looking outside of their relationship. She could not handle the fact that he ended the relationship, not only ended the relationship, but found a beautiful woman shortly after and became engaged. So, pride dictated for Pauline that she win back his affection. And so, Pauline decides to follow him to Paris. She tracks down her former partner and declares her undying love. And to her surprise, Felix appears oblivious to her charms. Because, you guys, obviously, I'm sure we're all on the same page here, he was in love with Monique. Pauline was so confused because in the past, one sultry look would have bent him to her will. He would have been eating out of the palm of her hand, but this time it didn't work. Felix told her that she needed to forget about him and move on with her life as he had. He was blissfully happy with Monique and could not imagine being with anybody else. So, Pauline boards the train back to her university, feeling absolutely humiliated in a way that she never had before in her life. But this humiliation would not last long. By the time she stepped onto the platform in the town of her university, it had morphed into something else. The humiliation transformed into rage that she could barely contain at this point. In her mind, Felix had dishonored and disrespected her, so a price had to be paid. Within days of following Felix to Paris, she goes shopping, and she goes shopping for a gun, eventually setting on a 25 caliber automatic gun. So in March of 1951, she booked a return trip to Paris. Now, throughout her life, Pauline had been an enthusiastic diarist. For example, she kept a journal in which she recorded the details of her many lovers, scoring them on various aspects of their lovemaking and physique. Now, I do just want to say, there is no judgment here from me about having multiple sexual partners. As long as you are a consenting adult, there is nothing wrong with that. And my hope is that that is how Pauline experienced these intimate relationships. Back to her diaries. So the habit of note-taking would now provide a forewarning to Felix. Before leaving her apartment near her university, Pauline writes a letter, kind of like a suicide note of sorts, in which she details her plan to shoot Felix and then kill herself. But her landlady found the letter and called Felix, warning him. And by the time Pauline arrived in Paris, Felix knew what her intentions were. So as a result, he refused to meet with her in private, arranging a sit-down at a local cafe instead. Which, I don't know how I feel about this, because if you're deranged enough, what's gonna stop you from shooting somebody at a cafe? Especially when you already have the plan to kill yourself after. That's the kind of mindset that's like, I have nothing to lose. So in my mind, if I knew someone wanted to kill me, you would not catch me meeting with them, period. I would be calling the local authorities, the FBI, whatever, whoever could help me, that's who I would be calling. But Felix was an autonomous man and could make his own decisions. And so he decides to meet her at the local cafe and bring a friend along. But Pauline did not show up for that meeting. And somewhat relieved, Felix returns to his apartment building on Rue de la Croix-Vert in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. What Felix didn't know was that Pauline was waiting downstairs, lurking in the shadows. Felix at this point had barely returned to his residence when there was a knock at the door. Thinking that it was his friend, he opened it, and there was Pauline pointing the gun at him from just a couple feet away. She could barely miss at this point if she pulled the trigger. And that's exactly what she did. Pauline fires off 3 shots, firing in rapid succession. Each of the bullets hit him on the mark, hitting Felix in the face at point-blank range. As he crumples to the floor, Pauline placed the weapon against her temple and pulls the trigger. But at this critical moment for her, the gun jams, responding with a series of dull clicks. Desperate, Pauline cast the weapon aside and sprinted into the apartment. There, she ripped the gas hose from its fitting and placed it in her mouth. When neighbors arrived moments later, attracted by all of the commotion and all of the noise, they he found Pauline sucking on the pipe like someone trying to siphon gasoline from a vehicle. So Pauline is caught red-handed, essentially, and even if there was question as to who murdered Felix, she was at the scene of the crime, basically trying to commit suicide. So she is arrested and charged with his murder, and she goes on trial in November of 1953. So there really was never any doubt that it was Pauline who pulled the trigger. Her attorney raised a defense commonly used in France cases such as this. He cited basically what is the what's the word I'm looking for? The equivalent to a crime of passion. Except that this case did not meet that definition exactly. Pauline's relationship with Felix had ended around 18 months earlier. So in the eyes of the law and the court, especially the court of public opinion, this was not a spur of the moment murder. It was premeditated. There was considerable premeditation in this murder. So that defense of a crime of passion doesn't really fit the narrative. Now, given her sullied reputation, Pauline was never likely to receive a sympathetic hearing. As is often the case in true crime situations, the media had a field day during the trial, describing her in the most unflattering terms, dredging up her Nazi affiliation, and even got their hands on her diary and used that to paint this picture that she had hundreds of lovers and made her look bad because of it. And in the end, the verdict of the court really was predictable. Pauline was found guilty, although the judge did grant her extenuating circumstances. And that, at least, spared her from the guillotine. And she was only given a life sentence instead. And so she was packed up and shipped off to prison to begin serving her sentence. However, interestingly enough, despite having a life sentence, this would amount to only 7 years. She was released in March of 1960 and resumed her medical studies under an assumed name. And it seemed like the world had completely forgotten about her. But then came the release of that French movie I mentioned earlier, and suddenly her story was back in the headlines. The publicity would eventually result in her abandoning her homeland of France and moving to Morocco, which had recently at this time gained independence from France. By now, Pauline was a doctor, having completed her medical degree. And in 1962, 2 years after she was released from prison, she obtained an internship at a hospital in Mogador. And it was while she was stationed there that she met Jean Lafourcade, an oil engineer. Now, Pauline was still an attractive woman, and she still knew how to wrap men around her finger and manipulate them. Lafourcade was soon proposing marriage, and unlike with Felix, Pauline accepted. Perhaps she decided that it was time to finally settle down. And given the fact that she was a convicted murderer, but only served 7 years, somehow became a doctor. I don't know how that happened, but it did. Maybe she thought that, wow, I am really lucky. Maybe I should just settle down and get married. But alas, it was not to be. One day, Jean Lafourcade was sitting in a dentist's office when he picked up a True Detective magazine. Staring back at him from the cover was a woman who was very familiar to him. He knew her as Andre, but according to the magazine, her name was Pauline. After reading the whole tale of Nazi collaboration and murder, he went home and confronted his fiancée. Now, what else could Pauline do but confess? After hearing her admit that everything the magazine said was true, he, understandably so, broke off the engagement. And this rejection would be the final straw for Pauline Dubuisson. On September 22nd of 1963, she was found dead in her apartment, having taken an overdose of barbiturates. She was just 37 years old at the time of her suicide, and she was buried in an unmarked grave in Mogador Cemetery in accordance with the wishes expressed in her suicide note. So that concludes the case of Pauline Dubuisson. Let me know a couple things. One, let me know what you thought about this case. And let me know what you think about the soft-spoken narration of this video. I welcome all feedback. I will not be offended if you didn't like this or if you preferred whispering. I personally like both, as I mentioned earlier, and there are some times that I'm looking for whispering, and there are some times that I am more searching for soft-spoken. So I wanted to give it a try. Depending on the reaction, this could very well be the first and last time I do it, but let me know. My thoughts on the Pauline Dubuisson case is just, to an extent, it's pretty predictable, I suppose, when you know that it's rejection at play and this woman couldn't handle it, right? Like, we know that, okay, she's probably gonna go kill the man that rejected her. But what's really surprised me about this case is that she committed suicide without attempting to kill Jean. I would have thought that she would have gone after him just like she went after Felix. But she didn't, and that really did surprise me. It didn't surprise me necessarily that she committed suicide, but I would have thought it would have been like the murder-suicide approach that she had planned for Felix. So I don't know what that's about, to be honest with you, and I'm not sure if anybody knows what that's about. But that was the case of Pauline Dubuisson. And I am actually interested in watching the French film that came out about her. So, if you have any recommendations on cases you would like covered, I am very open to hearing those. I do have a list going already, but I'm happy to add them to the list that I do have. Again, thank you so much for choosing to be with me and to listen to another true crime case. And I look forward to the next case that I am able to share with you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time.